All right, let's get right into it. What we're about to go through is an incredibly raw, deeply personal story about a life lived with schizophrenia. This is an unflinching look at immense hardship, profound regret, and the long, difficult road toward redemption, all told in one man's own words. So, right from the jump, he's making a pact with us, the viewers. This isn't some dry clinical case study, it's a confession. He's telling us the name might not be real, but everything else is. He's inviting us into his most private, most painful moments with a promise of total honesty. So, where does a story like this start? Well, where they all do, right? In childhood. But for him, this wasn't a time of safety, of being nurtured. It was a time defined by complete instability and just this deep, overpowering feeling of being totally alone. He was born in 1969, and you can see that by the time he's just 7 years old starting school, he already feels like a total outcast. And that feeling was only made worse by the chaos at home. For a full decade of his most formative years, his mother, who also had schizophrenia, was in and out of institutions for long stretches at a time. The tough reality was there was just no safe place for him. At home, he was basically a parent to his 5 younger siblings because his own parents were either gone or not able to function. He even had to quit school. But school wasn't some great escape. It was just more of the same: ridicule, failure. And all the while, he was struggling with undiagnosed ADHD. And he sums up that whole experience with this one just gut-wrenching metaphor: a bird out of its nest. It perfectly captures that feeling of being completely unprotected, alone, with no real place in the world to call home. Now, you'd hope things might stabilize as he got older, but they didn't. As he moved into his teens and early adulthood, that instability from his childhood just intensified. It created this vortex of chaos that would pull him down for years and years to come. And here you see this really tragic, repeating pattern take hold. First, he's a kid, visiting his mom in the hospital. Then, the role gets handed down, and he's visiting his own siblings in institutions. And then finally, the cycle completes itself. In 1986, at just 16 years old, he becomes the patient. His adult life starts with that same wild energy. He gets married at 21, but it falls apart in 5 months. He starts leaning on marijuana just to handle social situations. For a minute there, it looks like he's made it. He's a father, a successful business owner, and then the bottom just falls out. In 1996, he tries crack and he gets arrested. And that one moment in 1996, it kicked off a struggle that would last for a quarter of a century. Just let that sink in. 25 years. That is how long he says he was, in his own words, enslaved to his addiction. This brings us to what is really the dark heart of his entire confession. He calls it the sinister blow, a terrible, life-altering event with his father that would haunt him forever. He talks about this overwhelming, all-consuming need for love and attention that just erupted inside of him. And fueled by his illness and drug use, that need became this twisted, impossible demand. He didn't just want his dad. He wanted, and I quote, a perfect father. So for 2 straight months, he unleashed a relentless psychological assault on him. He blamed his father for absolutely everything, for his own failures, for his mother's sickness, all of it. And this was all aimed at a man who was 5 years sober, a man the narrator himself knew was fragile and vulnerable. I mean, his own words tell you just how intense this was. Mercilessly, he just kept hitting him with these brutal criticisms, and his father couldn't even defend himself. It was a one-sided demolition. And the consequences? They were devastatingly direct. First, his father just shut down, went silent. But then his body started to fail. He stopped eating. He couldn't walk anymore, couldn't speak. He slipped into a coma, and then he died. The narrator is crystal clear on this point. There was no other illness, no accident. He believes to his core that his words killed his father. After his father's death, all that rage and psychosis, it just evaporated. And it was replaced by something else. Something he calls the absolute cruelest feeling a human being can experience: remorse. And this isn't some textbook definition. This is his definition, forged in agony. To him, remorse is an intense fire, burning the very core of his soul. It's a psychic pain that, as he says, crucifies him. So you see this horrible, vicious loop that gets created. The overwhelming pain of what he did drove him deeper and deeper into his addiction. He spent the next 22 years trying to escape his own guilt by burying it under the gigantic psychic pain that he could get from crack cocaine. Now, the final part of his story isn't about some neat, tidy ending. It's not a happily ever after situation. It's about the ongoing, painful, messy struggle towards what he hopes might one day be some form of redemption. But even in all this darkness, you see these glimmers of change. I mean, look at his relationship with his mother. He's brutally honest. For a long time, it was pure, mutual hatred. But crazily enough, he says it was the tragedy of his father's death that finally started to melt that ice and allowed them to build a real, affectionate bond. He doesn't shy away from the horror of what he did. In fact, he sees that sinister blow as the turning point. It was the absolute bottom, the moment that forced him onto this long path of what he calls redemption, a journey of constantly getting up and, falling down again and again.
And that leaves us with this really profound, difficult question. His story is about accountability, for sure. But it's also about illness, about circumstance. He has to live every single day with what he did, trying to find some way forward. And it forces you to ask, can anyone ever truly escape the shadow of their past? Is forgiveness a destination you finally reach? Or is it just the path you have to walk forever?